Amen. You know, it's this idea of healing that I've been thinking a lot about this week. I know that on the news, Colorado passed 10,000 people who have died from COVID. And it's hard for me to even comprehend. It's hard for me to understand how there are more people online and in a sanctuary. It's hard for me to understand that there are months and months and months that we did everything online, and now masks and air purifiers and nerves and angst, and some of us are coming and it's not quite the same, and even still we come and we're online. I know some of you are cooking. I know some folks are in pajamas. That's fine. I'm not saying anything. The people online, everybody here is appropriately dressed. I want to be clear about that because they can't see you. But it's still unnerving for me too. And I guess part of that is looking at the Torah reading, and it's Vayechi. I'm not really talking about the Torah portion except for one word, Vayechi. Just Vayechi. Vayechi is in chapter 47, and it's the first significant word of the Torah portion. And it says, Vayechi, and Jacob lived. And he lived. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Vayechi, and he lived. And if you really think about it for a bit, Jacob has had his own fair share. He made some mistakes when he was young. He grew up and was estranged from family. Later, he was estranged from his own homeland and had to live in Egypt. There were good moments too. He made up with the brother that he was always arguing with, so that's a positive. He reunited with family when Joseph, the guy with the cool jacket, when he realized that not only was he alive, but he was a prominent figure in Egypt. And he lived out the rest of his life in Egypt, a place that wasn't familiar, a place that was certainly new. Maybe he never learned the language like lots of immigrants. We don't know. But he had his losses, and he had his hurts, and he moved to Egypt because there was a famine in his home. And the text says, Vayechi, and he lived. Now, there's lots of other words in Hebrew about how we talk about where I live. There's gar, which is sort of like your residence kind of living. There's yashav, about settling and dwelling someplace. But the term in the text is Vayechi, he lived. And you know that word Vayechi because it's the same root as when we say Chai, which is the symbol 18. We always make these B'nai Mitzvah gifts in the multiples of 18 because it's Chai, which means life. And if you didn't know that, you know Tevye and L'chaim, which is to life. Vayechi, and he lived. And I'm thinking about it, it couldn't have been easy for him to live so far away. It couldn't have been easy for him to have so many years with broken family relationships. It couldn't have been easy with the fact that he hurt his family with his choices. And I'm convinced of that because when he has this wrestling match with an angel and his name is changed from Jacob to Israel, he walks away with a limp. So, like lots of us, he has... Holly's walking with a limp these days, so I made her laugh. We have, like Jacob, high moments in our lives and low moments in our lives. And it still has to be Vayechi. And we live, and we go on, and we journey, and we do the best we can. How do we do that when this pandemic gets scary again? How do we feel like we can just go on and not realize that 10,000 people died in just this one state, just Colorado. What about the whole world? Can we, when I say that, it's getting scary again, some people never stopped being afraid. And is this the first again? Is it the third again? Is it the fourth again? I've had moments of uts and angst a number of times. Then I chill out, and then it comes up again, and we're not sure what holds for our futures. Sometimes when I look at our biblical writers, all of our texts in the Torah, I think they see things so clearly. There's good and there's bad. There's reward, there's punishments. If there's a plague, if there's an epidemic, then it means that you've done something wrong. Easy. Now, I don't believe that's how God works or how the world works or how creation works. But they did, and I understand that they did. It was a little bit more black and white, and that's okay. And I think they really needed to understand that, like we do, I think, that there's a cause for the hard stuff that happens. There's a reason. It's hard to live our lives feeling like there's no reason for this hard stuff. It just happens. But I think when we grow, we sometimes are going to come to peace with the fact that there is no reason, that there's chaos in the world. And just like that story of creation, God starts to make order, but that chaos still is going to bubble up. For the writers of the Torah, a plague meant a punishment. It was a consequence for bad actions. I don't think that's true. We know of plagues of 10 of them when the Egyptians wouldn't let our ancestors out of Egyptian slavery. And so God was trying to convince them that the one they thought was the primary God, Pharaoh, wasn't really a god, was just a guy, and really couldn't and wasn't all-powerful. If we look at another scenario, we see that there is a rebellion against Moses and leadership from a guy named Korach, and all of his followers experienced the plague. And it was very clearly a punishment. And when Aaron, Moses' brother, steps forward and makes atonement for the people, the plague stops, just like that. There's even another time when there's a plague, when there is a lot of idolatry amongst the ancient Israelites. And God sends this punishment. And there's a zealot named Pinchas who executes 2 people. And for me, that's pretty problematic. But I'll share a point with you about it. He executes these people, and all of a sudden the plague stops, because he's protecting the integrity of the people of Israel. Now, with my 21st century lens, I have words for Pinchas. He could have made another choice. But even still, for the biblical writers, for our spiritual memories, for the truths that the Torah can still tell us, even with uncomfortable texts like Pinchas, what it tells me is that all of these things that happen, these plagues, can be responded to with actions. Now, sometimes there's a physical action that they do, and sometimes there was a spiritual action. You know, later on, with the story of Pinchas, the writers in Psalms, much later in the Torah, much later in the Bible, they say that the sacrifices offered to pagan idols, they provoked anger by their deeds, and a plague broke out among them. Pinchas stood up and intervened, and the plague ceased. They don't say how just that he intervened. It was reckoned to his merit from generation to generation, to eternity. I actually think we have incredible power. I think we have a lot of power. And part of the reason why I'm thinking about this, too, is that for our 10th graders here, in preparation for taking them on a trip to Washington, D.C. to learn about social justice issues, I hope, to go to this seminar, and for them to then lobby their representatives in Congress, I do this because I believe that they have important voices, and when we were asking them, how powerful do you think they are, they felt like they had no power whatsoever. Nobody would listen to a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds. And I have to try and convince them otherwise. And I really believe that's true and important. And I'm saying the same thing here. I think we have power. We can intervene. And it's not going to be just with prayer, right? Thoughts and prayers isn't going to be enough. I think prayer isn't going to fix the injustices in the world, but these prayers can change me. The prayers can help me see some truths. The prayer can help me find some strength, to recognize my power, to stand up and be counted and try and figure out how I can intervene. Remember that prayerful poem from Rabbi Ferdinand Isserman. Prayer invites God's presence to suffuse our spirits, God's will to prevail in our lives. Prayer might not bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city, but prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, and rebuild a weakened will. I think prayer can change me, and I think prayer can change you and us, and we then can intervene on God's behalf to build a better, stronger, and safer world. I think this pandemic has taken its toll in ways we can't really understand yet. And we can't forget that it's still raging. We know that it has left lots of us feeling exhausted and frustrated, even depleted, particularly those in caring professions. And we can't forget those who have been alone in their homes or alone in their grief. So, I guess the message is we get to intervene. And it can start with prayer, but it can't end with prayer. Prayer, I hope, leads to generosity. Prayer leads to writing your representatives. Prayer can lead us to tolerate ourselves wearing these masks when encountering others without the need for reminders and putting the burden on someone else who might feel scared. Prayer can lead us towards getting vaccinated and then boosted. It's important. Prayer is going to lead us to community, even if it feels different, because we can't be alone. Prayer reminds us that we have to do our part to heal not just a broken or fragmented world, but one that's really wounded. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our special ancestor, he was able to do it. And we know it because it says Vayechi. He lived. He didn't just dwell. He didn't take up residence. He lived. And I think we have to figure out how to do the same with everything that we're going through, pandemic and beyond. We can choose life, make a difference and a presence in our world, in our community, with our friends, with our families, and even to be a little gentle with ourselves. So we must. Let's move to Alenu.